Okay, good evening, everybody. Apologies from my side. I had some technical issues as well, so apologies for being late. Our topic for tonight is using advantage in development in the opening. There's quite a lot of theory that I'm going to touch on tonight, and there are also quite a few games that I want to refer to. So we'll see how time goes. Um, the theory I'm going to run through very briefly because some of these things are known already, others aspects we have touched on in previous sessions. Okay, so when it comes to talking about advantage in development in the opening, I'm also going to refer to the psychological aspect of it. Okay, you know by now that when you develop your pieces, ultimately you are taught that you're going to have to start with your minor pieces, namely your bishops, your knights, and essentially moving the center pawns, the E and the D pawn. Um, we are also told that we need to focus on three aspects: development, center control, and king safety as part of the opening stage of the game. However, as we move along, we think we've arrived in our game, and then we tend to deviate from the basics. So my first point is that we need to adopt a correct psychological attitude. Also, psychological attitude, in terms of the fact that we must not underestimate our opponent. We must not underestimate their ability and so forth. We must not underestimate their mentality, thinking that I know more than my opponent or that type of thing. All right, I'm going to go to the second aspect. Capablanca, he referred to this, when he spoke about the four golden principles relating to technique. So coaches can teach you openings, but when it comes to middle game and end game, you have to develop your own technique. But there are certain basics that you need to bear in mind. Okay, so one of the things relating to technique, these mental notes that you have to make for yourself, is the fact that, first of all, you must not allow any counterplay from your opponent. All right? If you can keep your opponent under pressure, if you can keep your opponent defending all the time, then your opponent will not have any opportunity to be able to come back into the game and start a counter attack. So do not allow counterplay. You need to pay attention and you need to spot threats by your opponent in good time. The second aspect is, and this is quite important, do not hurry. I often tell my students that you've got besides your king, you've got 15 more other pieces. Why do we just want to operate with 2 or 3 pieces at a time? Okay, so you need to position your pieces. They are a team that work together. So first aim to improve your position and patiently build up. And when the timing is right, that's when you implement your plans, and then that's how you get combinations going. Combinations is often defined in chess as a series of attacking moves. Combinations is not defined as an attack only by one move or by two moves or 2 pieces for that matter. All right, so do not hurry, patiently build up and work towards a plan. Improve your position. We've also spoken about in the past the principle of 2 weaknesses, and this will be evident also once again in 1 or 2 of the games that we're going to be going through. The principle of 2 weaknesses simply says that when you are attacking more than 1 weakness, it makes defense more difficult for your opponent, because then you are actually, your opponent, he is strained. His pieces are strained. They are tied down to defending more than 1 position, and there's no way that they'll even have any more resources left to be able to attack you. The fourth aspect is that you need to be making the correct exchanges. And this refers to Capablanca's principle. Capablanca believed that the side with material advantage should try to exchange pieces. And then he also believed that the defending side should try to exchange the pawns. All right. If you're defending and you exchange pawns, you could end up with a draw position because your opponent might have insufficient mating material in the end or whatever. If you're exchanging those pawns, you are reducing the possibility of that pawn being promoted to a queen or other bigger piece for that matter. So when we consider positional advantages, one of the things that's also going to come up in the games is the fact that we need to, at all times, with each and every move, we need to be evaluating the position. We've heard about doing a CCT process, checks, captures, and threats. So you need to be evaluating your position. You need to consider the positional elements. And then you also need to be having, to be maintaining and exploiting the positional advantages that you possess. Okay, so in talking tonight, we're going to be talking about having a lead in development. We're going to be looking at positional advantages, but we're also going to talk about how situations arise as a result of the opening stage and the minor advantages that you had, and these advantages actually accumulate. Okay, and how you can actually have a very simple game plan once you've determined the advantage that you have. Okay, so examples of positional advantages, I'm just going to briefly refer to them, would be open file control, getting your rooks in there early, or whether it is a semi-open file, also getting your rooks in there. Okay, last week we spoke about this, rooks and semi-open file positions. Okay, another advantage would be that inferior pawn structure which your opponent possesses, the weak squares in your opponent's position, and then you having a good bishop as opposed to your opponent's bad bishop. Another example of positional advantages would be activity of the pieces. If your pieces are blocked out, then they are useless to you. Similarly, if you are able to block out your opponent's pieces, if they are offside, then they're not part of the game. They might as well be completely removed from the board. We have spoken in past sessions about the activity of the pieces and also the mobility of the pawns. Your pawns need to be mobile. If they are stuck at the back, those backward pawns or whatever, those pawns are actually hindering the movement of the rest of the pieces. They are blocking them. Okay, and then the final example of positional advantages would be good or bad coordination of the pieces. All right, just under point 5, I will be touching on this and it will be evident in the game. Causes of positional advantages could be seen as opponent's clumsy play, but you should not only be banking just on your opponent making those grave mistakes. The second aspect would be that you should be putting pressure on the position. And the pressure that you exert will cause your opponent actually to be able to wilt, to be able to make those mistakes, to choose the wrong options and so forth. And then also causes of positional advantages would be how you benefit from exchanges. Exchanges being a separate lesson, but one of the main themes would be that you should only be exchanging if you are going to be benefiting, if it improves your position, if you're exchanging your bad pieces for and getting rid of those bad pieces, and you have the more active pieces, etc. and if it's going to improve your position and so on. So that list there, we can continue with that some other time. I will also be touching on some concepts relating to the lead in development. You could have a development advantage, but what if you are faced with an open position or closed position? So what option do I choose there? So open positions, first of all, you'll find that the position itself may develop its own dynamic because the developed pieces attack the opponent. And in doing so, you'll often be able to gain that extra tempo, and you will be able to surprise your opponent with that attack. In the closed position, you'll find that the lead in development plays a lesser part. And that, of course, means that the side which has a lead in development should try to open up the game. That might lead us to the next point. In order to open up the game, you might have to make a pawn sacrifice to obtain the initiative. The side which has a lead in development must attack, otherwise it is in danger of losing its advantage. So those are basically the theoretical points that I'm going to be touching on in a nutshell, and with the various teams. So we'll see how we go along. So the first game that we're going to be looking at is a game played by Yusipov versus Christian in 1993, and this game is to show the principle. It illustrates the principle of those techniques that I spoke about, the 4 principles. Okay, so it starts off with d4 d6, e4, knight f6. I'm going fast because I want to reach a certain position.
Andrew, just share your screen for the games.
Oh gosh, I was wondering now what is happening here. Thank you, but okay, so did I stop sharing the other one?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's just start off again. Your first few moves, f3, a bit of an unusual move there, e5, and just look at the early exchanges. So the next move is d takes e5. Okay, my screen just went on a blank now, yeah. Okay, at this stage, what do you guys think? Is that a good idea here? For white, is it a good idea? What does he have an advantage? What do you guys think? What will you be doing in this position?
I think it's an advantage because queen takes d8 with like queen, and then black has lost castling rights.
Exactly, that's exactly what happened. Okay, who was speaking now?
Van Eyck.
All right, thank you. So that is correct. My program is just hanging here quickly. Okay, so exactly what you said there. The king took, bishop c4, bishop e6. Now, just look at that move from black. It's actually a terrible move. And then he still proceeds to make that. Okay, is this to develop the bishop? The bishop cannot go further than e6 because it's going to be taken. But now immediately It's move number 7. And look at the position, only can he not call, but what a double pawn is that it is a center pawn. All right. Any comments? For anybody want to say anything about that? Okay, so moving further, knight h3, bishop c5. Let's see how white takes it further. And that's the reason why he went h3 to reroute and come to f2 immediately. Black is actually desperate to be exchanging pieces, but here we see that the exchange favors white because the dark squared bishop is slightly stronger than the opposing knight. Okay, so it's now 2 knights versus bishop and knight, and we're going to see how interesting the game turns out. King e7. All right, so after king e2, black goes h6. Now at this stage, is there any other move that you'd want to suggest instead of h6? Let's see. Rawan, any other move that you would want to suggest other than h6?
Maybe rook d6 or d7 to double up my rooks on the open file.
Agreed. Okay. Anybody else? Edwell? Any other move that you'd want to suggest? Okay, let me see. I see a message in the chat here. Rook d8. Okay. All right. So Edward has the same idea as Rawan. And now you see that with black's move to h6, he's already got a weak double pawn on the e file. So his king side is already messed up. And now the h6 move is further weakening his position with pawn moves. Okay. White continues with knight c2, rook to d7. Here you'll see that you at this point with rook d7, I want you guys to notice that there's only one open file. So now white has got to make some drastic decisions. Okay. There's only one open file. It is obvious that black is going to want to double his rooks. So the main problem in this position is the question of exchanging. What shall we do with the open file? Should we exchange all the rooks on it? Or should we avoid exchanges? Or should we just exchange only one pair of rooks? So those are the radical decisions that you need to make in this type of position. Okay, so let's see what happened. White played rook h to d1. And there you find that the correct answer is to only exchange one pair of rooks. And that mainly is in order to reduce any possible counterplay. So simplify the game. They might be equal in points, but certainly white has that developmental advantage. Okay, white needs to keep at least one rook to prepare for his own active interventions. So rooks were doubled, and there goes an exchange. Now, just interestingly, look how white now regroups. Knight e1, knight e8 there. Black is actually, in terms of that knight from f6, couldn't really penetrate anything on the king side to improve that position. But now you see why the knight went to e1 in order to come to d3, knight to d6, and now bishop to f2. So at this point, basically they are patient. The position of the bishop is also improved, and there is the option of going to G3. Why am I suggesting G3? Waylon?
Play F4.
Why am I suggesting bishop to G3?
Bishop G3. Or the pawn, the weak pawn, E5.
Okay, so there's a patient build-up of the E5 pawn, yes. Correct. Thank you, Waylon. Okay, black played B6. Even there, again, there's a weakness because look what's happening on the queen side now as well. So that second weakness will be targeted at a later stage. There, bishop goes to G3, knight F7, A4. Already making plans because of the B6 move and A5. So now you'll see, guys, that white needs a second weakness to attack. And in the theory that I referred to, you saw there that I spoke about the principle of second weaknesses. Okay, creating a second weakness. And now it makes sense to play on the queen side. So rook C1, king F6, B5, knight E7 there. I'm just going through very quickly so you can see how the game worked out. Okay, from that position, even now with C5, that rook went to B8, a move with the previous move. But now it doesn't make sense, the rook going to B8 there, and white played C4 and C5. So now the rook is completely stuck behind the backward pawn. It's another plus for white. It's another positional advantage for white. Do you guys see the point that I'm trying to make? All right, so let's see what happens. Black played C5. But interesting, I do not think black actually knew what was the next move going to be. Okay, it surprised him. So I'm now looking, is a name Mendel. Okay, white to play. Mendel, can you tell us what would your next move be for white in this position? Anybody else?
Can you hear me?
Pardon?
Yeah. For me, I think I will get the rook again back on the D file. So if the knight moves again, I control the open file. I don't know. The first tight there on the pawns is blocked there on the queen side.
Okay, thank you for that. Werner, any suggestion from your side?
I was thinking en passant on C6.
Now you won't be able to en passant.
Oh, yes, sorry.
You won't be able to en passant. Okay, let me help you guys. There's actually a sacrifice involved. Okay, unexpected, but it's a positional sacrifice. Knight takes C5. That pawn is already advanced there, and white is also utilizing the fact that he has the bishop. So it's a knight for the two pawns. All right, so let's see what happened now. But you're actually going to see how the pressure increases. Okay, with bishop d6, I think you can actually anticipate that c5 is going to come. So the rook goes to b7 and rook d1. Now, why does black do that? Okay, he's actually returning material, hoping to get some counterplay. He has gained, with the exchange he has gained, but he's actually now going to end up with two pawns behind. But prior to that move, These knights can't go. If you look at what I'm showing you, these knights can't even go anywhere. They are being completely, kept at bay there. If this knight on e7 wants to go anywhere, you'll have to go to g6 and with the idea of coming to f4. But by that time, white might even have played g3, which would also have stopped that. This knight on d8 also cannot go anywhere except f7. So they'll just be going backward and forth. Okay, so that was the exchange there. Once again, bishop comes back to c5, rook b2, looking to exchange rooks and simplify the game. Notice now that white has got a pass pawn going. Okay, and look at how that double pawn has been a thorn for black throughout this game. Okay, so the a5 pawn is isolated, extremely weak, and cannot be defended at all. There he goes. Another pawn has fallen, and what I said earlier, knight f4, king d2, knight takes g2. There where the pawn goes. Okay, there's the check coming in there and forced exchange. All right. If you were ahead in development, if you're ahead material-wise and so forth, simplify the game. And knight c4, king c2. He managed to avoid the exchange, but that in itself is almost a killer blow. The c7 move. So rook goes to a8, rook to c3, and now when the knight moves away, the rook is going to be behind the pawn. Okay, a5, offering the pawn to black. Rook takes, and after that promotion there's absolutely nothing that he can do. Okay. I think some of the points that I've mentioned, guys, it has come through in this game. And so now we're going to look at the next game. Let's just go back to my original slide. You'll see some of the points that I've spoken about. There was the open file, the control, the fight for the open file. There were targeting of weak squares. There was an inferior pawn structure. And you noticed also that the main principle relating to the technique, the first one, white did not allow any counterplay. And then point 3, the principle of the two weaknesses. Okay, so now that takes me to the next position. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
The board itself. Okay. In this game, which was played in 1999, you'll see that white is better. He controls the A file and has an advantage in space. So black has the B6 pawn as a weakness, but it is hard to attack and relatively easy to defend. So despite that, it is worth forcing your opponent into the defensive and tying down some of the pieces. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly because from this current game, there's about another 70 more moves that's going to come. But I want you to see just the patient build-up, and it's almost a cat and mouse game where white is actually waiting for black to make a move, and black is so limited Just watch those rooks. Watch what happens to the to black's rooks and how they are cramped for space. Okay. If I go through that very quickly, that rook just moves to b7, b8 all the time. White is completely dominating with the doubling of his rooks on the A file. And black does not want to exchange. F4. F4 is basically seen as the forceful move to try and infiltrate black's position. What has happened here? If you guys look at the position, would you agree with me that white is completely dominant because of black's weak queenside pawn structure? Would you guys agree with me?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so after f4, even if the exchange doesn't happen immediately, now you see that the knight on f7 cannot even come to g5. Look at black's pieces on the queen side. They are totally cramped. Their mobility has actually been nullified. They cannot really move properly with their pieces. The knight on c8 is like it's completely useless there. Okay. And the rooks in itself, look at the rook on d8, it is supporting a backward pawn. The other rook on b7 is also supporting a backward pawn. Okay, so pawns on b6 and d6, that is being targeted. And the knight on c4 for white, it's a monster knight. All right, so black has been forced to draw his pieces to the queen side, and hence white is playing f4, hoping to force a breakthrough on the king side, because black's pieces are actually offside. Okay, so rook e8. You see black is actually just moving the same pieces henceforth, and now after a8 the rook just goes back to b7. Okay, and it's just e8, h8 all the time. So now white tries to bring his king across so that he can free his knight and to go elsewhere. Again, like I said, black is reluctant to exchange. So they are being very patient. It's like they're trying to suss each other out. But at this stage now, you're going to ask, but why? Why does white now finally exchange? He could have exchanged long time already. And the reason is that he has moved his rook away from the h8 file. So now the timing is right to possibly come with a breakthrough. Okay, and there we go, g5, which black was not expecting to happen. Okay, so now there the principle of two weaknesses once again coming into play. Let's just look the follow through. F takes g5. Okay. Black gained the pawn, but it is only temporary because immediately the rook goes to g1. And now you see that from a closed position, a few moves back, white has now suddenly managed to obtain a very useful advantage. Okay, and now there's once again another pawn weakness here on the g file for black. Okay, he recovers the pawn. Rook goes to h7. He's now forced to defend the g7 pawn as well, and now the king can just come through. The black king on c7 is tied down together with the knight on c6, c8. To the defense of the b6 and d6 pawn. So that's why the king came to c7, so that hopefully that other knight can go to e7. And there, that's exactly what I said is going to happen. takes with a pawn. Rook HG1 is basically, I would say, the last throw of the dice for black, because he wants to then come and play rook to G1. Okay, king F3 check. Now, at this stage, white is offering black the pawn on C3. But I think it is pretty obvious that the pawn on G3 is very, very strong. Knight E3, rook A3, G7, there we go. And the rook has to come back. And knight F5. Forcing the knight away. And now you can actually see there's another reason why knight F5 is going to be played. Let's see. Edwell, give me another reason besides chasing the knight to E7. What is the other target? Why did white basically play knight F5? What do you think? Okay, Mendel. Okay, Edward is saying it kind of blocks knight to G8. Mendel, what do you think? Why white also played knight F5?
Well, if the knight, then the rook will control the open file. Also, yeah, if the knight exchange now, then it will be queen, and take the rook. That's one way.
Okay. Waylon, which other square is this knight on F5 attacking? Think in terms of weaknesses in black's position.
D6.
Correct. That's what I was looking for. Remember, I spoke earlier about the weaknesses on B6 and D6. So there is an additional plan, once again referring to the principle of two weaknesses. So the knight on F5 forces black's knight to retreat, and then the rook goes to G6, attacking the D6 pawn. Okay, so the rook now has to come and defend on D8, and patiently the white king goes nearer. White was not too worried about the C4 pawn. He was wanted to check what black was doing, so he played C4, and now the king can come back and defend. So there's no backup to that. Okay, and that at that point you'll see that white black was actually forced to resign at that stage because it was useless. Okay, if we go back to our initial theory, you'll actually see that there were blacks, there were weak squares in the position, there were weak pawns in the position. I'm just referring to that quickly. There was an open file, but you had to consider the exchanges. Yeah, there was a careful evaluation of the position, and there were positional elements. Certainly, if you look at those two rooks that were inactive there, the rook that was just moving B7, B8 all the time for black. If you look at the knights that were offside, the pieces that were tied to the queen side, the principle of two weaknesses came up at least 3 times in the game. Counterplay was not being allowed and so forth. And there was pressure being put on the exchanges. Okay, it was initially a closed position. So there was a need for white to open up the position. Okay, so now the next one, the next game in itself, let me just share my, going to the next game, we're going to see how the situation is actually being exploited. Positional advantages is our next theme, what we're going to be talking about, and how do you exploit positional advantages. Not only how to exploit the positional advantages, but also how to obtain a positional advantage and then to exploit it. Okay, can you guys see the board now that I'm showing? Not. Okay, let's just share again. All right, so this was a game played in 2005. And like I said, we're going to be talking about how to exploit positional advantages. Started with the queen's pawn opening. I'm just going through very quickly. Knight f3. All right. Bishop d3 there, knight c6. Some of you might be familiar with some of these opening moves. The next move for black is a bit unusual, b6. It's actually a very suspect move. Yes, he wants to bring his bishop to b7, but it might not be the correct option at that stage. Knight c3, castling, d5 for white. Who can tell me? Let's see who I can ask. I also see my good friend, Mr. Mark Peterson is in attendance. Mark, can you tell us, good evening, can you tell us why would white want to play d5? What is the main idea?
I think basically he's gaining space with d5. Also, I think if he can kick the knight away from the c6 square, then it would be good for him. Yeah, but I think the main idea is to gain space there in the center. Maybe also exchange a center pawn for one of his non-center pawns.
Okay, well said there, Mark. Just to add on to what you were saying, I said that b6 might not be the correct move. So b6, the idea was having the pawn on d5 might cause black to think twice about playing bishop to b7. Also, the white pawn on d5 is stopping black's pawn from going to d5, which means that black is going to end up with a backward pawn on d6. Okay.
Oh, I see. Nice.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Mark. You just need to mute yourself again. Somebody's asking who's playing the music. Okay. All right. So after d5, knight to d4. Knight to b4, sorry. Now the bishop goes to e2. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you why, but I think by now you know that it is in white's best interest to hold on to his bishops. It's an open play game. He's already controlling the center. He's dominating the opening. So why not play bishop to e2, and with your very next move you chase away the knight on b4. The knight cannot then go back to c6, so he's going to end up having to go to a very awkward square of a6. There's the backward pawn that I spoke about on d6. So look at how that bishop on e7 suddenly becomes a bad bishop for now. It is limited to the one diagonal. Here we go. Knight gets chased away, and knight has to go to a6. Knight to d2. Now, Rawan, why do you think white is making another move with his knight when he still has undeveloped pieces?
Oh, I think he wants to bring his knight to control the e4 square more with the knight to d2. And the only piece that he hasn't developed is his dark squared bishops, which doesn't really have a good square to go to at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent answer there. E4 is the key, whether he wants to push the knight away, but also if you look at black's most useful piece at this moment is the knight on f6. So like Rawan is saying, let's try to exchange that. It gives him several options. He can either play knight e4 because his knights are coupled then. He can push e4, and there's another option of maybe considering the f4 pawn to be pushed as well to have a control of the center. But let's see how it continues. Knight c7, and there we go, e4. Forcing actually a weakness, because with black's next move, e5, there's your d6 backward pawn. Okay? Exactly what I predicted there earlier. So now let's look at plan B. There's a weakness of the queen center pawn. b6 caused the weakness earlier. So let's give the option there. The knight goes into a retreat on e8, possibly to play f5. Immediately, white takes advantage. Yes, the bishop on c8 is not developed, but why not get rid of that bishop also? It's going to be getting some space now, so let's get rid of it and leave black with pieces that are useless to him. The rook on a8 is still stuck, but look at the rook on f8. It's really what we call a white elephant. Okay, it does not belong there. It's completely useless. Okay, and with bishop to g4, immediately you see that white is preventing the f5 move. Okay, and moreover exchanges his opponent's more active bishop. So this guys, this is how you're going to collect pluses in positional play. Bishop to g5 gets played, rook to b1. So now you can actually see rook to b1 seems also like a very passive move, but there's a long-term plan to exchange on c5, and then the rook will then have some space. g6 was played, okay, to invite the f5 pawn. Queen goes c8, and there's b takes c5, what I spoke about. Interestingly, black took with a b pawn, so he's still stuck with a backward d6 pawn. Queen goes to a4, a6, knight f3, and then the exchange on c1 with the bishops, and then the f rook takes. Okay, now look at the next move, f6. completely bad, because the knight on e8 cannot now come back to f6. Already d6 is bad, so this poor knight is defending now two backward pawns. Okay, the other knight on c7 also does not have any space to move. Cannot go to e6, cannot go to b5. a6 is blocked. In fact, that knight, all the potential squares, a8, e8, he cannot go anywhere. All right, he's completely useless. Some students might say now that that knight is no longer a knight, he's a donkey. But yeah, that's what it boils down to. Okay. Now I want you to see that when a6 was played, it was actually a very bad move from black. I forgot to mention that, because immediately the b6 square became available. Okay. Just see somebody saying something in the chat there. Oh, Edwell is laughing out loud because I'm saying that the knight on c7 is a donkey. All right. Thanks for appreciating the humor, Edwell. Okay, so there was those exchanges, f6, and then the rook to b6 is what we spoke about. Black is now desperate, and he wants to exchange because his rook on a8 was useless. So try to exchange your opponent's most active pieces for your inactive pieces. White is not falling for the joke. White decides to double up his rooks. And now he simplifies the game, and he still ends up with a rook on b6. All right, so rook to f7 is played. h3, queen d7. Basically forcing, and now once again, I want you to reflect. Look, we do the CCT with each and every move. Those knights are looking beautiful because they are coupled, but that's as far as their beauty goes. Furthermore, in terms of space, nothing is happening. There's definitely a positional advantage. White, on the other hand, I want you to see how this knight is going to jump in on a4. But also, I want you to see White's next move. Completely brilliant. There's nothing. White has a good grasp of the position. Those pieces are inactive there. There's a weak pawn on a6, so the knight on c7 has to stick there. The weak pawn on d6, the knight on e8 has to stay there if he wants to move his rook away. But White's next move is completely brilliant. White decides to regroup. Plan B must kick in now, and he goes knight to d2. Waylon, why are we going knight to d2? What is the plan? Is Waylon still with us? Or anybody else want to answer that?
Is it knight b3?
Knight went, yeah, he wants to go to b3, yes. And from b3, possibly wants to go to which other square, Werner?
To a5.
Very good. Okay, so now we're going to see what happens. All right, Edward's also saying a5, so knight d2, king f8, there's knight b3 going, and black desperate for counterplay, f5. It's still, e4 is covered by the knight on c3, but white still wants that pawn there, those pawns connected, so he plays f3. In case there's the exchange on e4, h5 comes. Once again, now we have weakening of the king side. And here we go, a5. Knight a5, rook goes to d8. The rook wants to go to a8 to protect, but look at that strong outpost. Knight c6. It's monster square for the knight. Rook goes to a8. Rook goes to b7. And that is a complete blunder for black. Okay, a5, it makes it even worse because knight a4. Now look in terms of mobility for that rook. The rook cannot go anywhere really except a6. So after rook a4, the knight he goes to a6. But there we have a situation of knight going to b8 and trapping the rook. Okay, and that's why I said a5 was extremely bad. But it was played with the intention of rook a6 and obviously to try and get the rook to have some space and get into the game. But these two knights were too powerful. If we look at why this game was lost to black, we could largely conclude it was due to the inactivity of his pieces. The positional advantages that white enjoyed was overwhelming, and white's timing was perfect when he decided to exchange. He was also inviting weaknesses in the position. Okay, so let's look at the next game, which also speaks about exploiting positional advantages. It's a game played between Michalakis and Yusipov, 2003. This is exactly the same theme. Okay, so I'm just going to go very quickly. In this case, black wins the game, but you're going to actually see what transpired. White's in a hurry to bring his queen out. Okay, at that stage, bishop g5, a6. Look at the weaknesses already at this stage. The a4 move here has already caused the b pawn to become very weak. Queen takes d4, early exchange of queens. And now also exchange of the bishops. If you look at bishop c5, knight b6, and interestingly, it is endgame already, so therefore black chooses not to castle. His king can be more centralized. And immediately now you guys can see the doubling of the black rooks on the C file. I spoke about that B pawn. So now there's certainly plans happening. At this stage, with white doubling his rooks, now you could almost say that they are equal. Okay, doubling of rooks on the C file as opposed to the D file and so forth. So they kind of appear to be equal, but black wants to simplify the game. All right, so after those pawn exchanges, now immediately I want you to see the G file that is open. Okay, black now has that option because of the king on G2, so he's got an excuse to move his rook to G8. Once again now, as in the previous games, is a regrouping of the knight. nothing really, no much drama happening in the game. White appears to have found a very good outpost. And now the weak B pawn is exchanged. Look at how active Black's rook has become in this game. Okay, White's rook is basically tied down to the defense of his pawns. Interesting pawn structure. If you guys look at it, both sides have 3 isolated pawns. But look at what, I want you to notice what Black does here. How he forces a mistake from White. With a check there. And now Black has actually regrouped his knight with an h5 move. He appears to be targeting f4, but he had bigger plans in going with his knight to g3. And White realized that too late. Okay, so look at that knight g3. There's a check that comes in. After knight g3, king f1 comes, and now the pawn falls, but you guys, I want you to just see what happens in the next few moves, where he forces the rook to be lost because there's a fork pending. Okay, so both are equal in pawns, but like I said, the key here is that Black's rook is more active. Okay, so now the king goes to g3. He's afraid of the discovered attack, so the king has to go forward to h4 or to g4, and then rook a4 check. King cannot go to f3. I want you guys to see that if the king goes to f3, what's the danger there, Rawan?
Knight d5 forks
Knight
the king and rook.
d4, you mean?
D4, my bad. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, so there's that fork. So the king is limited there. So now the king kind of has to go to h5. That's basically his only square. And there's still the knight d4 move coming in. Rook goes to g3, and brilliant move next for Black. In fact, Black was very sneaky by forcing the king out to go up the board, and White resigned at this stage because with his very next move, he's actually going to be losing his rook. Okay, where can the king go? King goes there to g4. You can actually see the rook coming to g5. And when the rook goes to h4, the obvious threat is, okay. Any comments or questions that you guys want to make about these two games that I went through now on exploiting the positions?
Sir,
Yeah.
you said in the opening,
Yeah.
Queen A4, isn't that still theory though? Way back in the beginning of this game. Isn't that still theory though?
It is still theory, but in order to get the pawn back, yes, it will be, but there was no rush for you to get that pawn back. That's why I did not consider it to be the best move.
Okay, thank you.
You'd actually be aiding Black's cause. Black could be playing bishop or knight or whatever to block the check. Inevitably, Black, if he's smart, and I'm sure he is smart, he will let go of that pawn. All right, he will not commit his pieces to defending that weakness, and that's why I said it's not the best move, because ultimately focus in development, focus on developing your minor pieces, your bishops and your knights, getting your king to safety first. Why be in a hurry to get the to recover the c4 pawn, which is a double pawn in any case? Okay, but nothing stops you from playing that move, Werner. Okay, and
Okay,
that's
thank
the
you.
reason why I made a comment. All right, let's go to the next one quickly.
Sorry, Andrew, just one question from me.
Yes.
With regards to the previous game, where White went to move the knight, I think from f3 to d4, and he had the whole maneuver where the knight ended up on c6. Right?
Yes.
I think we basically. How do you train yourself to see those type of plans? Is it just a case of you had to see that you needed more forces, or is it was it White's worst place piece? Because I think I wouldn't have been able to see that plan would actually work out because he made all that moves in a row, 4 night moves in a row, where Black really couldn't even improve his position.
Yeah. Um, yeah. First of all, it's interesting question that you're asking. It's a question of, you know, with each and every move, and chess players are very lazy. We're reluctant, and we try to take shortcuts. You should be instilling this habit of, with each and every move, to do that checks, captures, and threats. We need to identify our opponent's plan with each and every move. And we should also not be looking just at the next one or two moves, but what is his actual idea? Why play a passive move like retreating your knight? But then you should actually be seeing the reason that he wants to regroup and he wants to target a certain square. And this is what you need to have in mind, that you want to attain that position 5 or 6 or 7 moves time, but not only for yourself, but you should be looking at your opponent's long-term plan, especially with the fact that if your pieces are so stuck, so clogged up, and they reduced really to a very passive role, you should actually be even more vigilant, worried about what your opponent is really trying to do and why is he making those funny moves and so forth. And then you should then come up with ideas for yourself. Sometimes you find that, like I said, in the one game, it's a waiting game. Both players wanting to see what the other one's move is, what the intentions are, but you should also then, if your opponent is making a certain move, it should give you a clue as to how you can respond. Okay, I hope I answered your question in that regard. Okay, the next game is a game played in 1914. I just had to put this game in here. It's a very short game, guys. It's a game played between Spielman and Framberg. So here we're talking about how to exploit a lead in development. Okay, just looking, I'm not going to share it now, but one of the things that we said about how to exploit a lead in development is that we need to consider open positions, closed positions. All right. And we also need to consider what positional advantages that we hold. So just look at this game. When I was looking at this game this morning, I just had to tell myself I need to put this game in. Okay. Very straightforward. Knight c3, knight f6. Now, for those of you who might have played me somewhere along the line, you'll know that this is one of my favorite openings that I like to play. Can anybody tell me what the name of this opening is? Where White is playing e4 and the second one, knight c3? Vienna game, Rowan. Thank you.
The Vienna
All right.
game. Oh, Vienna
Absolutely.
game.
Yeah, it's the Vienna game. All right. I do have my own variation, so don't try to study this variation against me. But yes, I do like the next move, f4. Okay, so I'm a fan of the Vienna game f4 move, or I also like the King's Gambit, Rowan. All right, so d5. I tell you, this for me was an awesome game. We just look at what happens. Knight takes. Okay, so bishop g4 there, and queen e2. Bit of a crazy move because it is blocking the bishop on f1. Okay, knight c5 I think is not the best move for black, and it actually just makes it easy for white. That move for me was the losing move because the d4 move here now creates the space for the bishop to come out and the center control. But you're actually going to see that white gives off those center pawns. It's absolutely crazy what happens in because of queen h4. I think most of us would not expect the next move, g3, because now it certainly appears as if you're giving off the pawn. Okay, somebody says something in the chat. Oh, Mark is saying he'll remember the Vienna game or the Queen's Gambit. Okay, Mark. Okay, so g3, crazy. Mark, it was actually King's Gambit, not Queen's Gambit. So queen takes d4 there. Bishop e3. There the other pawn also falls. So now it appears as if white is messing up. He's given off two pawns. He's given off two pawns. I was just responding to a question from Werner there. Next move for white. Remember, we are being totally dominant. We want to dominate the positions. Okay, if you're playing white, I'm not sure if you saw the move there. Is Wayland still with us? Okay, I'm going to ask Mendel. Mendel, what move would you suggest for white in this case?
What about king? What is that? Queenside castling for white.
That is so correct, Mendel. Well done. Okay, this is the advantage of queenside castling is that you not only getting your king to safety, but that beautiful rook on the d file. Already, guys, you had the situation of two attackers on the d5 pawn, only one defender. But let's add some pressure. Yes, white is 2 pawns down, but white is able to be destructive for these next few moves precisely because of the leading development. I'm going to open up the moves for you. Yes, c6 is expected to protect the pawn, but the very next move for white is absolutely brilliant. Black did not expect it. He was still protecting the pawn, but look at the sacrifice coming up. He could afford that sacrifice because king and queen are also still in this. They're on the e file. The king is totally exposed. He's not even free to queenside castle, to kingside castle because of the bishop on f8. Neither do we find him able to castle queenside because of the knight on b8. All right, that queen was doing too much work, being too greedy to capture pawns and so forth. So now c takes d5. So now the white has regained his 2 pawns, but he's still now a piece down. But there's a beautiful fork happening there. Instead of taking the knight on c5, maybe making an exchange sacrifice, he made that sacrifice even further. More awesome, bishop to c4. So now there's a threat of a discovered attack. Desperate, trying to exchange queens. queen e4, the white queen is unprotected. Should white move his queen away? Look at what he does next. I heard somebody gasp there. All right, Edward, do you want to comment for us, or are you shocked with that move? Okay. Where's my friend Mark? Mark, what's your comment? Okay.
No, that's an awesome move, definitely. I actually sneak peek here at your notation as well. So at the annotation that side, so I see queen f3 is made by rook e1.
Yeah.
Wow. Like
Okay.
basically,
Edward has commented and said, oh, what a move, it is the move of the game. And that's the reason why I said I just needed to share this game with you guys. Queen f3 is played there. Here you can actually see the rook coming. The only other move there now is bishop e7. You can actually anticipate that's going to happen. King only has f8 to play. So instead of coming here and doing the discovered attack and regaining the queen, your next move is, thank you very much. It was nice seeing you. Bye-bye. So absolutely brilliant. But the key, guys, to this game, and that's why I included this game, the key here to white winning is not so much the sacrifices and so forth. It is the rapid mobilization of his pieces that has paid off. Black was more focused. If you count how many times he's moved his queen, he was more focused on gaining those pawns and stuff like that. He wasn't focusing on the basics. And that's why I said right at the start, we tend to deviate from the basics. He was not focused on getting his minor pieces out so that he can get his king to safety. King still stuck in the center. It was inviting black. Black was inviting white actually to make a sacrifice or so forth and get all of his pieces involved. All right. So, yeah. I just want to go to the last game for the night. Also on the same topic of exploitation. It's a bit longer than the 15 moves. A game played in 1948. E4, E5. It's a game between Max Euwe and Paul Keres. Once again, also in this game, in my book, I think black was totally dominant. Clearly had a strategy going there. Opening is, quickly, you may shout out. What
Roy
opening are we playing?
Lopez.
Thank you. All right. A6, bishop A4. Bit of a funny variation. Okay, probably Edward again saying, yeah, RL. I must not guess what RL is. Okay. D6, C3, F5. Okay. Bit of the unusual move. Many of us are not used to that being played with this opening, the F5 move. It's a kind of move that I like. Bishop takes F5, D4, knight G4, knight G5, sorry, and then D5. Yeah, black is inviting white to take on C6 and to weaken the queenside structure, but he's also got strong center pawn control. Okay, so let's see what happens. F3. Also a strange move by white. Now, I want you to see the E3 move played by black. And then I'm just going to, I'm just going up. I'm not going to share it with you, but I just want to say under what I said earlier, concepts relating to the lead in development. One of the things I said is make a pawn sacrifice to obtain the initiative. Okay, so in this case, you'll see that black made that pawn sacrifice. Just continuing, queen goes to f3 and queen f6. And queen takes e3 check, sacrificing the pawn. And now compare black's development advantage to white. Okay, white still has two of his minor pieces that are undeveloped, as opposed to all of black's pieces are ready to rock and roll, except now that he needs to castle and then bring his rook to the center. Okay, white at this stage, even with his pawn structure, it's not looking the best. Should he decide to castle either king side or queen side, it's very risky. So white wants to now weaken black's queen side. Both of them king side castle. Knight goes to d2. So now the bishop on c1 is still blocked. Knight g6, g3. Rook a8. I think that was kind of expected there. Queen f2, bishop d3. Very, very strong square. And the reason why black is able to make such a move at this stage, guys, is the fact that black had completed his development. He's got his king to safety. So now, when you're in the middle game, first basic principle of the middle game is improve the position of your pieces. And now we're going to see a gradual build up, how the plans come together. Okay, rook f1 was supposed to be very strong for the f file, because there's a focus on the f file. However, now the bishop on d3 is forcing that rook to move away from the f1 square. So now we have the exchange of rooks. Black is actually keen to exchange rooks on e1 and have white recapture with the queen, because of the fact that the rook on h1 on a1 is unable to capture on e1 because of the bishop still there on c1. And there comes the sacrifice. It's a second sacrifice that's being made, but he could afford to do this, and this is the turning point in the game. Okay, the rook on a1 and the bishop on c1 have not been developed at all. They are unmoved, so they might as well be off the board. So sacrificing on f4 with the bishop, it's actually a very, very great plan, because of the fact that it negates the fact that there is a bishop on c1 that is inactive. Okay, so that sacrifice on f4, the reason why it was done is because it is completely exposing white's king now. I did say earlier, prior to the start of, prior to white castling, I said that, if I just go back to that move there, I did say that the pawn structure, even if you should castle king side, he's already got weaknesses going here, so the king will not be the safest. So now, if we look at what happened there, bishop takes f4, bishop for the 2 pawns. Look at that strong position. Okay, you already got the queen and the rook on the f file, and then you got the knight that can even control. It's controlling large areas. Whether it's h3, it can go to e2. There are very many different options. Desperately trying to defend there, but here, as I said, knight goes to e2, king to g2, and what are you going to do now when you have 2 knights that are coupled like that?
You can attack the one.
attack the one with which what move are you suggesting?
H6.
H6 is the obvious one, absolutely. Okay, so there you're bound to win the piece. Queen goes to D2 and queen to F5. No rush actually to take on G5. All right, there's absolutely no rush. Meanwhile, there is also a threat of queen coming to G4. Okay, guys, see that? So queen goes to E3 and H takes G5. Pretty obvious. Bishop to D2. Finally, the bishop moves. On move 24, the bishop comes out. And after this move, black is kind of forced to resign. Let's see what you said in the chat. Okay, Mark says that he would never have found E3, but he will be looking for these types of moves after this lesson to sack a pawn for the initiative. Thank you, Mark. At least is one point that I managed to get you to believe in. Okay, bishop E4, guys, and that with this stage, white cried enough. There's no more defense. It's important, count number of attackers, number of defenders. The bishop and the king were protecting E3, but now with the second one, a third attacker coming into play on E4, there's absolutely nothing that can be done, and the king is totally out in the open. Okay, I think you can also expect after E4, you can expect G4 to be happening. All right, guys, any quick comments about what I've said about this game? Okay, Waylon says the best move on move 7 was just to castle. So Waylon is referring to, yeah, he should have castled there, certainly. But yeah, white was actually his own worst enemy in this game. All right, guys, let me just go back to our original notes quickly, and just to summarize. So from the games that I went through, I have tried to do justice to our topic. I have tried to do justice. We spoke about technique. In the games, you must not allow any counterplay. You need to pay attention to and spot the threats by your opponent. That was evident in our games. We looked at the principles of two weaknesses. And when you have the advantage, you have to maintain the advantage. It's like when you're running a race. If you're out in front, you need to stay in front. You need to look over your shoulder who's chasing you. Yes, you need to be aware of the chasing pack, but you need to stay up front and you need to increase the pressure. And that means in your games, you need to maintain the positional advantages. You need to evaluate the position with each and every move, not fall asleep for 2 minutes and so forth, and then wake up when it's too late. I think also evident in the games that we went through, not only controlling large areas by way of the files, etc., but all of the games there were weaknesses. There were particularly we had inferior pawn structures. We had those backward pawns, etc., that were actually blocking out the rest of the pieces, and it did not cause enough activity of the opposing side's pieces. All right. So it resulted in bad coordination. It resulted in pressure being put on, and the opponents ran out of resources. All right. So I trust that we were able to do justice to tonight's topic, but certainly development starts in the opening. Development does not start in the middle or in the end game. All right. Development, I want to conclude with this and say that development is actually the foundation of your game. If there's no foundation, your entire game is going to collapse. All right. There's no attacking, there's no defending, there's absolutely nothing. If you're not prepared to develop properly and to position your pieces accordingly and to stick to the basics, you are doomed to fail. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Mr.
you
Chris,
for the lesson. I much appreciate it.
it's a pleasure. Burton, anything from your side?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. No, not a lot. Just for the guys that are playing this Saturday, hope just wish you best of luck. And I think it's important also for the guys that now that you have the opportunity to play standard time control games, that you actually do forward the recordings of your games, the notations, so that the coaches can actually go through your games and analyze those games and be able to give you guys some feedback around the games that you played. So yeah, so I'm just inviting you guys to just actually forward your games so that you can see how you guys are playing. Other than that, no, best of luck.
Okay. Thanks, Burton. All right, guys. We hope to see you guys joining us next week again. Our intermediate sessions on Tuesday. Thursdays, we have the advanced session and so forth. So, in fact, next Thursday, Burton, we might not have it next Thursday. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. The next Thursday is the Thursday before Easter Friday, so we're gonna skip
Yes.
next week. Yeah.
All right, but we will be having the intermediate sessions on Tuesday evening. All
Thank
right,
thank
guys,
you,
thanks
Andrew.
very much.
Thanks for the
Okay, bye-bye.
lesson.
Pleasure. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Burton.
Okay, thanks guys. Have a good evening.